أحسن يسويتش إت أوف. لأنه يطلع لك هذا، يمكن يطلع لك فيه. I know your rules. I know your rules. I know your rules.
خليها ماشي.
أنا we've been there once.
اكتب لي بس كتابة ها.
Just feel comfortable.
إذا في شيء بدي إياه من هذا بتعرف أنت الكلمة اللي مش عارفها تكتب لي إياها بخط كبير.
إن شاء الله.
خلص.
إن شاء الله. Now I know your bad habits.
Yes.
I know.
30 seconds stand by, Your Excellency.
Last 10 seconds. بالتوفيق إن شاء الله.
So we are almost on air. Now we are on air, Your Excellency. Good evening. I welcome you on air in this episode of our program Without Borders. The situation in Syria and the Arab region is there in all political maneuvers across the world, particularly a year on since the outbreak of uprising in Syria. And although Bulgaria has been in the European Union for only 5 years, it is one of the countries which lately has stood out in its approach to the Arab region. Maybe because of its geographical adjacency to the region or because of its former belonging to the Eastern Bloc. Tonight we are going to fathom out European politics in general and Bulgaria in particular vis-à-vis Syria and the Arab region with this episode with the Foreign Minister of Bulgaria, Nikola Miladov. He graduated from King's College in London with a Master's in Warfare Studies. He also got another Master's in International Relations from International and National Economic University in Sofia. He has been working since 2005 as a consultant at the World Bank, National Democratic Institute and International Republican Institute, among other international institutions in Southeastern Asia and the Middle East, including Egypt and Morocco. He was elected member of European Parliament in 2005. And also, he was defense minister from 2009 to 2010 and was appointed foreign minister in 27th of July 2010. Your Excellency, welcome to the show.
Very good to be here.
Today commemorates a year since the outbreak of Syrian revolution. How Europeans follow what's taking place in the country?
Indeed, and I want to begin first of all by paying tribute to all those 10,000 martyrs of freedom who have died in Syria for the simple reason of wanting to be a free and democratic country and having the rights that we all enjoy. And I want to begin by sending a very strong message to them of support, not just from us in Europe, particularly from us, the countries of Central and Eastern Europe who have gone from dictatorship to democracy and who understand the cost and the difficulty in making this transition. Our friends in Syria are not alone, and we will be there, all of us, to help them as that help is needed. But on your question on Europe, Europe has taken a very firm and very clear stand against the Assad regime and has said quite clearly that he must go through a political process that allows for transition in Syria to happen. We have imposed very substantial sanctions on the regime in Damascus. And all of us in Europe have been very active in the formation of the group of Friends of the Syrian People, in seeking ways in which we can take away the options of Mr. Assad to buy the weapons which he uses for his troops to attack his own people, and to working with the opposition in developing a new vision and a new agenda for a free and democratic Syria after President Assad. There is no debate in Europe that what is happening in Syria is completely wrong and that the responsibility for the killings and for the massacres, if I can use that word quite openly, lies clearly with the regime and with the military leadership of Syria.
But don't you think that the European position is less in terms of its responsibility, doesn't live up to the situations in Syria where there are thousands being killed, hundreds being arrested and above 60,000 wounded, and these numbers are on the increase daily. The European position does not live up to what's taking place in Syria.
I know that when 1 year ago, or a little bit more than a year ago today, some of us saw where Syria was going. And we sent a very strong message to President Assad, collectively then, that the violence must be stopped, a year ago. I think the first thing that we aimed to achieve was one Friday without violence in Syria. And that serious reforms need to be implemented, reforms that go beyond the expectations of people on the streets of Syria. When we collectively send that message, initially many of us thought that we can actually find a partner who would understand this message. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case, and it took quite some time for the international community to realize that. Meanwhile, I think what was quite clear from the very, very beginnings was that transition in Syria will be very difficult. And particularly the opposition to the regime in Damascus will have to walk a very long road to come together around a unified platform that brings together the different fractions and creates a vision for the future of Syria. At the same time, we saw the violence increase. And unfortunately, we ended up in a situation in which the international tools, the international instruments that can be used were blocked. At that point, what Europe, the European Union, did was exactly the right thing, and that was to impose extremely strict sanctions on the regime in Syria and send a very, very clear message to Damascus.
Were these sanctions enough? Do you think so?
I think there's more, there's a longer road to go to increase them, but they are substantial, and we're seeing the effects of these sanctions. What we need to do today is to stand together, the Arab world, the European Union, and the rest of us who believe that Syrians have every single right to live in freedom and democracy as everyone else, stand together and work with the opposition in helping them design what their vision for the future of Syria is. If that is done, and I believe this very firmly, if that is done, if we have that clear vision for the future, this will immensely help the international debate, and it will immensely help those in Syria who want to see where their country would go. I know that this may sound as not enough, but as somebody who comes from a country that has gone through its own transition process and has witnessed how in our neighborhood in Yugoslavia, right next door to my country, Bulgaria, we saw civil war, ethnic divisions, religious divisions, take the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. I can not stress strongly enough how important it is for us to have this unity within the international community on the political direction in which the situation in Syria should be going. Perhaps sometimes when you look at the violence and the pictures that one sees are awful and the information one receives from Syria is awful, we want to reach out and be more radical in how we address the situation. But we have to be very constrained because we understand the consequences not just for the Syria of today, but of the Syria of tomorrow. Syrian society is a complex society, but it is a society in which there is a strong tradition that the rights of human beings, individual human beings, are protected by the dignity of the nation. We should do everything possible to protect that for the future of Syria. I know that right now there are many discussions, but I am sure that as we increase the pressure on the regime in Damascus, as we work more actively with the opposition to design together a plan, a vision for the future of Syria, we will all end up doing the right things in support of freedom.
You were the most high profile and last European official to meet to go to Syria. You met Assad, and in your visit you have reached certain results upon which Europe has lately adopted positions. What's the outcome of your visits regarding the future of Syria and the revolution taking place there?
I was there in April of last year. And I went there because between the people of Bulgaria and the people of Syria there is a strong friendship. Syria is practically our neighbor. It is very close to Bulgaria. I went there with a message that included three parts. First, the violence must stop. Second, reforms that are initiated must go beyond what people expect if they are really to be credible. And I think at that point, the credibility of the message on reforms was one of the most important acts that we needed to achieve. And thirdly, that we all need, that there is plenty of experience in our own history in Bulgaria, in the history of Central and Eastern Europe, in the history of other countries, in the history of today's Arab world, that includes experience, includes knowledge of how to transition from a dictatorship to a democratic society. And for this to be done peacefully demands a lot of leadership and demands a lot of personal sacrifice. Unfortunately, 1 year later, or not, it didn't take us 1 year to understand that this message wasn't getting through. And it wasn't getting through because...
Why it didn't get through?
Because I think that those in Syria who were moderate, who wanted to see reforms, whether they're in the opposition, in the government, or average people who want to see their country benefit from this freedom which is now taking over the Arab world, did not see the hope, did not see that immediate light, this vision of assistance from the outside coming. And those who were more radical and who wanted to hang on to power at every cost, including by killing their own people, took control. And this was very unfortunate, and perhaps this is a failing of the international community 1 year ago. Because if we were all surprised... If we were all surprised in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Libya, Syria is not a surprise.
Now you talked about the international community. Why the international community failed, and so the International Security Council to adopt any resolution to stop bloodshed in Syria and limit the dictatorship and the control of the regime of its people?
I think everyone in the Security Council and in the international community is united in the understanding that nobody has a license to kill their own people. I think where we differ is in how we protect people from those who want to kill them in order to hang on to power. Our vision in Europe is quite clear about this. President Assad must engage in a political process, as has been drafted by the Arab League, and move on. Unfortunately, other countries see this differently. And it is probably very interesting to discuss why this is the case. But as somebody who is in politics today and not a historian, I think our task is to work closely with those countries that see things differently and convince them that the situation in Syria needs to be addressed. It does not need to be addressed through international military intervention. It can be addressed through a peaceful process. It can be addressed through political means in a transition that is still reasonable, that allows for the people of Syria to choose their own leadership.
After all this bloodshed, and these events taking place in Syria, do you think there is a possibility of a political transition?
I think there is a possibility of a political transition because I think we have one very important instrument on the table, and that is the understanding.
What is it?
And that is the understanding that when you control the armed forces, when you control the security apparatus in a country, you bear full responsibility for all the crimes that these security forces commit. The leadership of any regime, of any government that is in control of its armed forces bears full responsibility under international criminal law, under domestic criminal law, for all the crimes that are committed. And I think we need to be very, very clear to the people in Syria who are still, those who still are part of the security apparatus of President Assad, that that responsibility for the crimes that are being committed today lies squarely with them, and that they shall be prosecuted for these crimes once the regime is over. And I think it is very, very important for all of us to work directly, again I say, both with the opposition, but also with the government, to end this violence. In a country, in any country in the world, you can have violence. Sometimes this happens. But you should never allow it to go long enough that it destroys the fabric of a society. And it doesn't matter if you're a dictator, if you're a democrat, if you're a man in the street, or if you're a political leader. Everyone has that responsibility. And I'm absolutely sure that within President Assad's regime, there are people who do not want to see Syria destroyed as a society. And this is the message which we need to send to them very clearly. Step back, step aside today, because that responsibility lies with those who wield power legitimately.
As Europeans, how do you read the Russian position?
I think we need to understand the position of every country in the context of its own history and in the context of its own experience. And I say this from the experience of my own country. In 1876, the people of Bulgaria rose in an uprising against the Ottoman Empire. There was a massacre, there was international intervention, our War of Liberation in 1878, and we gained independence. In 1989, we ended our own dictatorship, and we developed a democratic system. We did it peacefully. Our neighbors did it violently. So we have that experience. We have seen the effects of a peaceful and a violent transition. I begin with this because I think it's important for us to not isolate our friends in Russia, that we need to talk to them, we need to consistently talk to them, and we need to explain why the situation in Syria cannot be allowed to continue. We need to explain it in a manner that they understand in their own history, which has been very violent, in their own experience, not just of the last 20 years, but of the last 100 years. And what would really help in this debate, and what would really help in the credibility of the debate of the future of Syria, will be when the Syrian opposition, no matter where it comes from, secular or religious, individual or politically organized, inside Syria or outside Syria, charts the way for the future of the country after President Assad. And then the people of Syria can feel safe for their own future. The international community can feel secure that there is a vision for the future of Syria. Our friends in Russia, America, China, across the world can understand that vision. And this is where I think we all must play a very active role. People in the Arab world, countries from the Arab world, and countries in Europe, because of our history, because of our knowledge, and because of our concern, not just for the today of Syria, but of what happens tomorrow.
There are many reports which say that Syria is behaving in this way because that Russia has a radar in Syria that allows it to monitor the region and has an assets in Tartus port and also sells large portion of its arms to Syria. Also, Russia's last footstep in the region is in Syria. So it's not let go of the regime with the ease and about which we're talking. That is just convincing Russia to change its position. We're talking about interests that lead Russia to fight until the end of the road to stand by the regime of Assad.
But do you believe that this can go on for long? Do you believe that this, what would it take? Another 10,000 people dead? I know that this explanation sounds very...
This is the question.
I know that this explanation sounds easy to understand. And it's probably very nice when you write it in a short story or make a film. But in the reality, I do not believe that any country around this world, big or small, wants to be perceived, if it cares about what public opinion says, and if it has democratic institutions and accountability of its government, that it wants to be perceived as supporting a regime that is willing to kill 10,000 people to stay in power. And
what pushes what can make Russia change its mind and position about this?
as I said in the beginning, it's a complex process. We need to understand the history of each country, the political dynamics of each country. But what would really help is advancing the dialogue among the opposition and formulating a vision for the future of Syria. Because here's what some people accuse, some people say now. If the regime in Damascus falls, Syria will be like Iraq. There will be violence, there will be chaos, it will be uncontrolled. It will upset the region as a whole. The interests of all the powers in the region will be affected. There is no vision, there is no experience in running a government. The economy will collapse. Let's look at these reasons. The economy of Syria has already collapsed. A vision needs to be developed and is possible. Syria will not be the first country to transition from dictatorship to democracy. The rights of its different communities can be protected in a way that actually can serve as an inspiring example for the rest of the region. Syria doesn't need to